Hi, everyone.
Hello.
How's everyone doing today?
Hello, I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Good, good. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome to our YIS Global Online Club. I'm glad you guys were able to join us today. We're going to be going over Unit 3, Lesson 2, Predicting the Future. Today's instructor is Abhinav. Abhinav comes to us from Westlake, California. And he was one of the teams, he was the winner of 2020's Global Stock Pitch Competition, him and his teammate, Arjan. So Abhinav, great to have you with us today. Super excited for your presentation. Whenever you want to get started, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. So yeah, I just wanted to show something real quick before we get into the actual presentation. So let me know what you can, if you guys can see Yahoo Finance right now.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so I just thought this was really interesting in the fact that, let me see. So I just thought it was really interesting to see how different factors can truly affect how stocks actually play, because even though they are still a realistic representation of the value of a company, so many different factors actually affect what happens and how they fluctuate. So if you look at Netflix, so they're doing pretty good right now. It's pretty stable, and there's been some good news really recently, but I just want to show you this. So this is right after some of the election news, and it was doing better. And then the sudden dip is actually when the vaccine came out. So, or news of a new vaccine being pretty good might be able to be used on everyone, and a healthy, safe vaccine. So you might be asking, why does this actually affect Netflix directly? So basically the correlation here is that if there's a new vaccine and then people start going out more, they're not at home anymore for as much time. So then they actually won't be watching as many movies at home together with their families. So this is kind of an extended correlation that a lot of investors kind of play on. And a lot of times it's not really direct, and it's fear that comes from this is probably going to go down. So people sell, so it ends up going down. So then this is another example. This company, Activision Blizzard, makes video games, and you can see a similar decline, even though they're doing pretty good. And they have been going down, but I just wanted to show how different factors such as the vaccine, which you may not think are directly correlated to companies like Netflix, actually do impact stuff. So now I think we can get into the lesson, unless there's any questions. All right, so this is Unit 3, Lesson 2, about trying to predict the future. So basically in Unit 3, you've already learned about economic moats and how those kind of apply and what different companies have and their different moats and how that helps them or hurts them. And this is really helpful in making predictions about what might be successful and which companies might not be successful. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to actually predict which companies are most likely to succeed over the long run, not based on any technical analysis, but mainly just on the company's fundamentals and the way they're structured as a business and how they get to their consumers. So let's get right into it. So this is just something we could try. So I know you guys, in the last lesson, did a really good job explaining about the moats. So if you guys wanted to, does anyone know what intangible assets were and how that actually applied to companies? Feel free to share in the chat or unmute yourselves, and it's fine if you don't, we can review it right now. Okay, yeah, so we can just go into it. So basically, intangible assets are something a company. So patents, unique manufacturing, or something that other companies don't have that they do. So a lot of times this also comes with branding. This is why you see a lot of people spend so much money on branding, because we associate certain brands as higher quality, even if other brands are still good quality. An example of this is clothing, especially because if you think about it, a lot of clothing is really similar, though people only tend to buy certain brands. And this is because they've kind of marketed and spent a lot of time and money on making people associate that brand with good quality and good clothes. High switching costs. So this one's interesting. So high switching costs is the cost of actually switching from one brand to another. So a really good example of this is Apple. A lot of people talk about Apple. So if you didn't know, Apple has an ecosystem where all of their devices are connected. So right now I'm presenting on a Mac and I have an iPhone. So I can share anything I want really easily without email or any of that. And I can even text from my computer. So these are just examples of how everything is connected. So if I did want it to leave Apple, it would cost a lot and I'd be leaving behind a lot, like these abilities that I have having an Apple phone and an Apple computer. So that's a cost, or there's actual money cost of leaving a brand. So the network effect is really cool. This is where if you have more consumers, it actually benefits the consumers more, which in turn benefits the company. Really good examples of this are social medias like Facebook, because I wouldn't want to be on Facebook as the only person on Facebook who could share, and I can only see my own messages, right? I go on Facebook to see the millions of other people and users who have their own different perspectives and views to share. So more people are inclined to join, right, to see all the other people. And then this also helps the company, obviously, as more people are using the product. So low cost advantage is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of times it's just companies get different access to different materials or production methods where they can produce for a much lower cost. And really good example of this is stuff like Costco or Walmart, because they're buying in such bulk and they have access to such large customer bases that they can purchase way more. And if you didn't know, purchasing in bulk just means purchasing a lot. So then if you purchase more, the cost is lower because you're still making a high profit because you're selling more units. So then they can actually sell for lower amounts and actually help their customers as well. So if you guys just wanted to, let me see. I had this right here. If you guys just wanted to look at this real quickly. So some examples of intangible assets are like Apple and Coca-Cola with their brand, because even if there are other drinks that are good, everyone knows Coca-Cola. And high switching costs. A good example of this is also banks, right? Because if you're going to leave a bank to go to a different one, you're going to end up losing money. And you wouldn't want to lose that money just for nothing, right? So that's a switching cost. And that might incline you to stay with the same bank further for more time. And then you have the network effect. And like we talked about, Facebook, with more people, it's a better interface. Also, Amazon, the more people you have as customers, the more sellers you would have. So that's more customers equals more sellers and options for the customers. So it directly benefits the customers and also the company of Amazon as well. And then the low cost advantage. Another really good example is oil or gasoline companies, as let's say you have more access to all the low cost oil reserves. You can sell oil for much cheaper, and obviously people would want to buy cheaper materials. So going back to the Prezi. So what are good businesses? So this is a really general descriptor, but right now it's usually something unusual about them, but that doesn't mean in a bad way. So basically a lot of companies have different unique characteristics that kind of distinguish them from other companies that may be doing a similar thing. And we'll be going to this example a lot, but like Apple, their phones, they do different stuff, but then at the same time, they're really similar to a lot of other phones. But then they have a brand name and a certain characterization of their products that people just want, and that environment, which just completely differentiates them and makes them a better business than, say, some normal phone manufacturer. So this here is just a fun clip from Back to the Future. And so obviously, I would obviously want this car compared to a normal car because this can do a lot of different things, a lot of cool things. So this is just a really extended example of how different brands have really unique characteristics, right? Like you may say this car drives and a Honda Pilot drives, but this car obviously has a lot of unique characteristics that really differentiate itself from an average car that would make you more inclined to buy it. All right. So now we're going to be looking at return on capital of two different companies. And we're going to be looking at their last 10 years and then the current 10 years. And you guys should predict which one you think is better. So Apple from 1995 to 2004 had a 13% ROE, while HP had 12.2%. So which one would you guys guess had a higher ROE now?
Apple.
Apple, okay, that's a good guess. I would probably guess Apple as well. Would you mind sharing why you picked Apple, or is that just a guess?
I mean, the initial ROE was higher, so I just went with the logical answer, I guess.
Yeah, of course, and that makes sense, right? It is possible. You can't completely predict the future, but you can have indicators, and that's definitely a good indicator to look at the last ROE of the decade and kind of predict that to the future. So now we'll look a little more into it. All right, so that's Apple and then HP. So then the real answer is, you guessed correct, Trenton, thank you for that, Apple. So Apple actually had a 30% ROE in the last decade, but HP actually decreased from 12% to 10%. So basically, this is what we've been talking about the entire time, about how Apple kind of has a distinguished brand, and obviously HP does too. You can't just discount that. But Apple's brand is so much bigger that even though they're making similar products with like computers and different devices like that, Apple has a completely different brand and ecosystem that kind of elevates the company and its brand. People are much more willing to buy Apple products together with the Apple products they already own. And this is just a huge part of it, which just adds to their kind of dominance and competitive advantages in the economy. Yeah, so this is also what we were talking about. So the brand name, I've mentioned that a lot by now, but strong brand, everyone who uses Apple's truly genuinely likes Apple products, and they would probably not want to switch. And then switching costs are, as I said, I'm kind of in an ecosystem if you buy a bunch of Apple products because they're all kind of interconnected, and you wouldn't want to lose that if you start switching to, let's say, an HP computer. I wouldn't be able to maybe text from my computer or do some of the sharing abilities that I have now. So that would be a problem. And for me, that's a big enough problem for me to not switch and stay within the Apple ecosystem. So this is also what I was alluding to in the beginning, that even though there are different factors kind of shifting day to day and temporary changes in stock, the stock performance follows a company's performance. So thus, a strong company has a strong stock. So Apple's increase, anyone who's been following it knows that it's pretty significant. And HP did increase, though not nearly as much as Apple. So we have a handout here, link into the chat, and then you guys can just follow along and go to page 20 of that PDF. It's just a PDF file, and then I'll just go on what you guys can see on my shared screen. So can you guys see this PDF now? Okay, thank you. So Swan Analysis is actually, it's a pretty popular form of analyzing a company's basically just strengths and weaknesses, which is the S and W of SWOT, and the external environment, which is the opportunities and threats, or the O and T of SWOT. So basically, the first two are pretty straightforward. What are strengths? Right? These are what gives it a competitive advantage. Why is one company better prepared to face the market than another. And this is kind of like intangible assets and a brand name, like patents, and like we talked about, oil companies that have exclusive access to like natural resources, and just a strong reputation overall. Then weaknesses, this is pretty obvious too. It's what kind of limits the firm from kind of achieving its goals. So these are, maybe you don't have patents, or you don't really have an established brand name, even if you have a good product, or you just simply don't have a good product. And a big part of this is a lot of companies have like hot commodities, right? We see these companies arise all the time of like the trend at that time, but they don't really have anything sustainable over long periods of time. That's also a really big weakness. And then how they treat employees with turnover, and also debt is always a limiting factor, especially for growing companies. Moving on to opportunities. So this is where a company can continue to grow, even with its strengths and weaknesses, because sometimes we see that companies reach their market cap. So what that means is a company kind of expanded to its potential and how many customers it can reach, and it can't really extend past that, right? There's no more people to actually sell to. But this is where like new technologies, new demand, and we see a lot of like new industries being created. That's always really good as an opportunity. And then like trade barriers and regulations are always good when they're reduced, so that you can kind of extend to more people, different countries, and also undiscovered customer needs. And this is what I was talking about with like new industries. I see this all the time, of like something, just as the times change, people want different things, and then industries and companies thus arise from those different needs. So then lastly, we have the threats, and these are just what can cause a company to falter or kind of lose opportunities. So a lot of these also, it's important to note that these are usually uncontrollable. You wouldn't want a controllable threat because you would subdue that, but these are usually uncontrollable, such as, sorry about that, there's a plane outside, I don't know if that's disturbing, but so these are like competitors' products, or like trade wars, tariffs, regulations. These are basically the opposite of opportunities. So this is just an example of SWOT analysis of Matt's Bike Shop. So Matt's Bike Shop is a bike shop that he has with long-time experience in riding, selling, and repairing bikes. This company is profitable with strong margins on its premium price bikes, opening a new store to increase growth and profits. So if we do the analysis on this company, we see that the strengths are obviously the experience with the 25-year history, and he has that kind of brand name, right, with the strong and loyal customer base. And they said he sells premium priced bikes, which should thus mean that he sells superior bikes with greater quality and has good relations with national brands. And also over the past 25 years, he's had strong sales and a generous profit margin. And lastly, he has a lot of knowledge with all that experience about the product line with skilled repair technicians. If we move on to weaknesses, he has limited capital for expansion, as he's just a small company and he doesn't have that much money on hand for him to buy and kind of expand with. And also, in such a niche industry, it's hard to find really skilled people who are willing to join these smaller companies. And then we have limited market penetration. And what that means is like a restaurant, right? Like there's always family-owned restaurants, and they can only be in that one spot unless they expand to other places. And it's really extremely difficult to expand. We see these chains all the time, like In-N-Out, or like anything popular, famous that you can see across the country, across the world. But that's really hard for small companies. And, you know, if you're a small company, a lot of younger employees kind of leave. So that's high employee turnover. Now for opportunities, he's trying to open a second location with more customers. And he can also partner up with other bike companies to access more money. He can also sell lower priced bikes to gain new buyers, you know, a new market, instead of only premium bikes. And then he can also increase the repair space, as a lot of people, if he's selling more bikes, probably will have more repairs. And then we talked about employee turnover, right? A lot of employees are quitting or leaving. So he could start an internship program. And a lot of big companies do that. Small companies do too, to get new, younger employees who are probably more likely to stick around longer. And then lastly, you could increase advertising to increase awareness about his bikes. So then we can move on to the threats. So online sales are gaining traction. So that means that his in-store sales of his bikes are probably going down. Also, if he has competitors down the street, that's pretty dangerous as selling competing bikes, right? And then there's new technologies like e-bikes, electronic bikes. So this could be bad if people start buying more of those. And then also, bikes are becoming more expensive as suppliers are raising prices. So this means that his prices are going to go up, and customers do not like higher prices. And lastly, they are spending more on marketing. So we have a couple examples here. I think you guys could go through these on your own. I think it's really good to actually analyze a company and see what they actually do, like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It really helps you analyze and see how different companies kind of approach their different business structures, and just be like specific, right? These are good with Nike and Home Depot, pretty popular brands. And yeah, let's just share the Prezi one more time. So it is easy to predict the future of companies with no mistakes. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, so basically that question is a little misleading, or not misleading, but it can be interpreted both ways. So obviously you'd expect a company with no mistakes to continue progressing in a kind of well-mannered way, right? You wouldn't expect them to start suddenly making a bunch of mistakes, but then at the same time, everything is so volatile, and even no matter to the ability that we can try to predict, it's still unpredictable to a certain extent. So it's not easy to predict a company with no mistakes, because that's kind of weird, right? No mistakes. No one makes no mistakes. So that's kind of the ideology behind that one. So distribution is basically how you get to your customers, right? How you distribute your product. So which type of moat is that part of, you guys think? All right, so distribution advantage is basically if you can get to more customers, right? Then the more customers that are in a distribution system, the less it costs for a company. And thus you can give more to your customers because it costs less. So basically, if I had to deliver packages to 5 people, that would cost me a lot because I would have to fly out to each person and deliver a package. But let's say I was distributing 2,000 packages, I could give it to a large company and they could just outsource that much cheaper, right? And then I could get to more customers, and the more customers that I actually distribute to, the more cheaper it actually gets for the customer. So that's why that's part of the network effect. All right, good job, Joe and Ryan. So this is the last question. Which industry has the greatest chance of withstanding an economic downturn? So that's basically like stuff starts like a recession, something like that. Which one do you think would be the best? All right, so it's food. So this one may seem a bit tricky at first, but it's pretty simple. Basically, technology, retail, and entertainment are all super cool, We love them, right? We use them all the time. But the only thing on this list that is actually a necessity to humankind still living is food. So obviously, food is not going to go away, right? In any recession, that's the one thing that should not go away because we need food to live. So that's basically what that is. So let's see who won. Okay, good job, Ryan. Trenton. We have Joe. All right. So good job to you guys and good job to everyone else who also participated in that. And we can just go back to this. And so that's basically what the Prezi is about. And these are some additional resources that you see on all the presentations. If you guys wanted to learn more, you know, see different things. And yeah, that was lesson 2 of unit 3 about predicting the future using kind of moats, economic moats, and kind of analyzing the fundamental business structure of these companies. So now I'm going to be playing the lesson video that we actually have.
And this is, we're mostly going to do an activity. You can do this activity in a group or individually. And this is one of our most popular activities that we do in Young Investor Society. And the title of this activity is Predicting the Future. So let's see if you are able to predict the future. And being able to predict the future is your ability to understand economic moats and what makes a company valuable. So just to review, we know there are certain economic moats that are barriers and defenses that protect the company against infiltrators or competition. These are intangible assets or brands, high switching costs, network effects, or low cost advantage. And these are the barriers to entry that protect the business. Our activity today is taking us all the way back to the year 2005. So imagine that we're going to time travel back to 2005. And as we time travel back, aliens have invaded the world. And aliens have come down to Earth and they have said, we are going to destroy you Earthlings. But as they're about to destroy everyone on Earth, they realize that there's a couple of rare people that are able to predict the future. They think, wow, these people must be prophets. How are they able to predict the future? And then they say, anyone who is able to predict the future, we will let live. How are we able to predict the future? Because there's a certain group of investors that are able to identify companies that are able to retain their competitive advantages. So take a look at this activity, complete it individually or in groups, and then
see, I was wrong.
Retain their economic advantage. And the metric that we'll measure here is return on equity. So these companies start out with a quite similar return on equity. And 10 years later, so in the year 2015, which company do you think was able to protect or defend their return on equity? And which company did not have an economic moat, so was unable to? So good luck, Earthlings, with your activity, and we'll come back and discuss. Can you predict the future? And we're going to go back in time and analyze companies in that process. So let's review what we've learned so far. We have learned that the majority of companies have their advantage competed away over time, but there are a few companies that have either narrow moats or wide moats, which gives them a long-term sustainable advantage. And some of these economic moats can be intangible assets or brands, high switching costs, network effect advantages, or low cost advantages. And we have gone through and identified the different moats and how to identify them. Remember that good companies have something unusual about them that stand out from the crowd. So let's jump to our activity. Let's assume that we have gone back to the year 2005. So all the way back to the future, And we are sitting there, and there are two companies, Hewlett Packard, which we're using for our laptop, or HP, or Apple. And both of these companies at the time, Hewlett Packard has a 12.5% ROE, and Apple has a 13.7% ROE. So very similar return on equity. Going back to 2005 and thinking what will happen over the next 10 years, which company do you think will be able to keep their ROE or even improve upon their ROE? And which company do you think will have their ROE eroded upon? And subsequently, the stock price will perform for both of those companies. So what would your guess be, Apple or HP? Let's go back and let's review the results. The answer is Apple. So Apple started out with a 13.7% ROE in 2004. And since then has increased that ROE from 13.7 to 30.9%. So they have launched the iPhone, they've launched the iPad, and subsequently Apple's stock price has performed extraordinary. Meanwhile, HP, their ROE has actually decreased over this 10-year period as people have bought less and less PCs and they've become more of a tech services company. So HP's ROE has decreased from 12.2% to 10% over this 10-year period. So in general, people just like MacBooks more than PCs. And Apple has a strong brand, but they built an ecosystem around their products. Apple benefits from a couple of economic moats that you could have identified even back in 2005. They had a strong brand and they had high switching costs, so they had an economic moat, a network effect within that. And how have their stock prices performed? Apple has increased by 975% during this period, whereas HP's stock price has only increased 40% over the same period. So being able to identify these moats was the key to generating great excess returns in the stock market. So now we're ready. So let's play an alien invasion game. Pretend we're back in 2005 and aliens have invaded the Earth. And when they invaded the Earth, they are ready to wipe out these Earthlings. But they notice something, that some rare people have the ability to predict the future. And they notice that these rare investors, which they call themselves, have the ability to predict which companies will last and which companies won't last. And so in lieu of wiping out everyone on Earth, they say, we're going to give investors, you Earthlings, a chance to predict the future. And if you show us that you have this power to predict the future, then we'll let you live. And so they're giving you 4 examples of companies in 2005. And your goal is, just like we did before, to choose between one of the 2. Which one do you think can retain their ROE and perform in the stock market by having an economic moat? And which companies do you think will become eroded and competed away and underperform in the stock market? So are you ready, Earthlings? You have 4 questions that are before you, and you have to get all 4 of them right if you would like to survive. Enjoy the activity. See whether you survived, Earthlings. Okay, so the first one was Nintendo. It was Disney versus Nintendo. So they both started out with a very similar ROE. Which one did you choose? The answer is Disney. So Disney's ROE over the next 10 years increased from 12.6% to 13%, so slightly increased. Whereas Nintendo's ROE declined from 15.1% to 9.4%. And stock prices reflected this. Disney was up 298%, whereas Nintendo was down over 10 years, 15%. So why did Disney perform? What was its moat? And why did Nintendo not perform? Disney has a number of economic moats, and first and foremost is their brand. So Disney has a very strong brand in their theme parks, but they own the rights, the intellectual property of Mickey Mouse, of Star Wars, they bought Marvel, and all of the Disney characters that they create, they own the rights to these brands. Not to mention ESPN, which is a very valuable TV network. Nintendo, on the other hand, was driven by more hit or miss, and they had a couple of years of weak game launches, which led to the underperformance of the stock. So answer to number one was Disney. Okay, so question number two, Abercrombie and Fitch, clothing retail store, or Coca-Cola, a beverage company. Both of these businesses, you would argue, have a brand advantage. So how did they perform? Coca-Cola started out with an ROE of 17.9% and increased that to 29.5% and generated stock performance of 110% over that period. So the answer was Coca-Cola. Let's contrast that with Abercrombie and Fitch. Abercrombie and Fitch actually started out with 55% ROE, which declined to an astonishing 16.4%, and the stock was down by a terrible 56% over 10 years. So whereas we would have looked at both businesses and say Coca-Cola has a brand, Abercrombie and Fitch has a brand, the reality is that Coca-Cola's brand was much more sustainable than Abercrombie and Fitch's brand, which is highly competitive in the clothing retail business. So the answer to number two was Coca-Cola. Number three, Southwest Airlines versus McDonald's. The answer here was close, but it was McDonald's was the winner. So Southwest Airlines started out with an ROE of 13.7%. But that ROE actually declined to 7.5% over that period. The stock was up 157%. Whereas McDonald's, the ROE went from 17% to 29.3%, and the stock was up 178%. So what made McDonald's ROE expand and Southwest's ROE decline during this 10-year period? Airlines, as we've talked about before, are capital-intensive businesses that have cyclicality. So even though Southwest Airlines was written about in most business schools and most business books as just an example of a great airline in a tough industry, it is still in a tough industry. Warren Buffett used to say that if you combine the good reputation of a manager with a bad reputation of an industry, it's the reputation of the industry that wins in the end. And so as good of a manager as you are, if you operate in a tough industry, like Southwest Airlines does, Southwest Airlines saw their ROE deteriorate over this period as oil prices went up and as competition went up in their regional airline spaces. Whereas McDonald's has this brand all across the world, our McDonald's stores, and this distribution advantage, where they were able to offer products such as all-day breakfast and continue to increase their prices, and their ROEs increase. Okay, last one. Let's see if you can get all four. Microsoft versus Verizon. So two technology companies. Which one do you think is the winner? The answer was Microsoft. So Microsoft went from a 26% ROE in 2005 to a 35% ROE in 2015 over 10 years. Whereas Verizon's ROE went the opposite direction from 21% to 15%. Stock price of Microsoft was up 78%, whereas Verizon was actually up a similar 73%. But what did we learn from these examples? Why did Microsoft expand their ROEs, whereas Verizon didn't? Microsoft, we would argue, has a network effect. So in its processing software, you can't go to college these days without having access to Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. Why? Because this is the standard in the industry and at school and at education. Whereas you need these software processors. Microsoft's Windows and their Office suite enable this strong network effect. And Verizon, even despite management's missteps, and Steve Ballmer left the company, and they bought Nokia and paid way too much for Nokia, Microsoft was still able to expand their ROE because of this strong network effect they had in their core software business. Verizon, on the other hand, had competition. It was capital intensive. They were building networks. AT&T was increasing their competition. And what they were able to price for on the data side as customers started using smartphones, Verizon was having to spend and build fiber networks and capacity, but they weren't able to charge for it. So I hope you enjoyed this activity. If you got all 4 of those right, kudos to you. You survived. You are a predictor of the future. And in today's day, you can make those same predictions. Find the companies that have economic moats, find the companies that have a sustainable advantage, and you will be able to predict the future of what companies will expand or retain their ROEs and be able to outperform in the stock market. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Keep investing, young investors.
All right, so we talked about this, and this is a little bit conflicting, but is it possible to predict the future? So what do we think? You could put in the chat or just say yes or no. All right, it's okay if you're not sure. So it's not, so the answer here is yes with the principles taught in YIS. So basically that one is you cannot completely predict the future, but using these principles of economic moats and different analysis that you can do about companies, you can see which ones are most likely to be more successful than others. So this one, company A has an ROE of 10% and sells the newest, hottest items like silly strings, right? That's a trend. Company B has an ROE of 5%, but sells information software to dozens of colleges. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. Though company E does have a higher ROE as of now, it's really selling a commodity, right? That's going to fizzle out in a couple of months, maybe a couple of years at best. Who's going to buy silly strings 20 years from now, right? Not a lot of people. But information software to colleges, right? That's pretty necessary. That's a crucial part, and that's going to last for a lot longer. So here the answer is company B. So here, what economic moat does Apple not benefit from? So you might think that they do really have a lot, or maybe even all of these moats. They do have switching costs, which we talked about, as you wouldn't want to leave that ecosystem that they built. Intangible assets, they have a lot of unique technologies in their different smartphones and technologies and like devices, right? And the network effect is also in play here, as the more people they bring in, the cheaper they can sell. So here it is actually the low cost advantage. Right, because that's only because they do sell pretty high quality products, and no matter how much they buy, it's still kind of tough to maintain a lower cost on those. So here, which economic moat ensures that the company continues to grow? So in reality, all of these do contribute to a company's growth, but some of them do contribute more than others. And switching costs are nice, right? Having a high switching cost is good because you'd be less inclined to go to a different company, but that's not the main moat that actually leads to growth. Intangible assets are pretty important, probably secondary, but like those are still really important. The network effect is also helpful, but not really the most important. But having a low cost advantage allows you to scale as you're not paying too much. So the answer here is low cost advantage. So here we see that company A has a 13.5% ROE, and it's an airline company that exclusively holds the rights to fly a certain flight path until 2020. So that would be like, let's just say until 2022. So, or company B has an ROE of 14.5%, and it's a 10-year-old technology company that deals directly with Microsoft software development team. So here, this one might be a little bit tricky, but the airline company, once it's 2020 or let's say 2022, they really don't have anything distinguishing them from other airline companies, right? They just become like every other one once other people can start flying from on their flight path. But company B has experience and it deals directly with Microsoft's software development team. And software development, if you didn't know, is a never-ending process. That's why you're always getting those small updates, right? They're just fixing bugs constantly, and then they're constantly improving it. So this one is also company B. All right, yeah. So that was just a quiz. And do you guys have any questions on anything that I reviewed today? Anything in the video that you guys were wondering? All right. And Mrs. Tobin, that was all we had planned for the lesson today, right?
Perfect. Yeah, that was it. You did a great job, Abby. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. We will be having a guest speaker next week. We have Laura Garretts joining us. Laura Garretts is the CEO for Global Roundure, and it is a female-led asset management company. So she's going to be talking about how to select a good business to invest in. So that would be great if you guys can join us next week. And until then, I'll see you guys. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.